This week's Te Ohanga Māori column comes from Guy Royal of the Tuia Group, and he joins me now from our Wellington studio to talk about his writing, which carries the title this week of How to Avoid Being Korg. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, excuse the pun, you'd know that Korg, had to get that in there, you know that Korg is Thor's offsider, his right-hand man in the latest Taika Waititi Marvel film. What have you got against Korg?
Yeah, kia ora, Will. Nothing particularly against Korg. He's a great character, but and to be fair, I'm just using him as a touchstone really to get to another point I want to make around being rock-like in your views of things. And basically the tenet of my article is I come across quite often, and I have a number of colleagues in the Maori sector who say the same to me, is that there seems to be a unyielding, ossified, rock-like view of the Maori economy, and it gets in the way sometimes of instigating deals, trying to break through into new ground, into new areas, trying to get to the table to around opportunities. And I think my article is basically about this. There's a kind of an issue around how we view the Maori economy, and it's effectively being just a bunch of nice natives with, some forests, farms and fishing, and then we just leave them at peace. But I hope to point out that yes, that's true objectively, but there's a bunch of other things going on, but I use Korg as a touchstone, and also as a way of Korg's kind of an interesting character too, because he's fundamentally he's a Maori character, and he's Maori culture in 2022.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that. Obviously, the Māori are in plenty of other industries apart from primary and agriculture, but there is a prevalence of Māori in primary industries. So you sort of go on in the article to talk about some of the issues that those industries do face, and therefore, the prevalence of those issues does fall on Māori in some way. So what are those sort of issues that you're pointing out?
Yeah, so if you think about it, the Māori economy inside the wide Aotearoa New Zealand economy, it's a truism that the New Zealand economy is built on a primary sector basis. The Māori economy is that on steroids, and it is fundamentally overweighted in many ways inside the primary sector. And you think about all the main headwinds that are facing the primary sector itself, they're significantly facing Māori. But when people throw around and belly around the Māori economy number of 70 billion, I think was the latest one that I saw, that number doesn't quite register or make real sense. There's a big factor of that number is that it's made up of a whole lot of an asset base that just can't be utilised quickly. It's not liquid. It can't be placed or deployed quickly into another sector with higher returns. That area has got assets that are locked in, primarily land assets that can't be sold, fishing quota that comes from treaty settlement, and other assets that came through settlement are seen as legacy settlement assets, can't be sold easily. And so there's a real issue around the ability to mobilise that 70 billion to grow it quickly. And then when you look at the mix, the primary sector mix, I put out in my article around how much, particularly in fisheries, but also forestry and horticulture, into beef and lamb, dairy, there's an overweighting of the Māori asset base into these sectors. And and everyone's pretty much seen the biggest issues that are facing them. We're staring in the headwinds right now of primarily climate change driven issues, but carbon footprints, supply line constraints, the fuel costs. Found out the fuel costs, particularly for our trawlers in the water space, are going up dramatically. We're seeing reducing fishing stocks. The slow acidity, or I don't know what the word is, acidation, that's a word of the oceans. And we're seeing more and more markets starting to turn against high emission, high polluting agriculture sector. And our agriculture emissions, of course, are the biggest set of emissions that we have in our contribution to climate change from New Zealand.
Yeah, so things are going to have to change, and I suppose it's whether existing industries and businesses sort of move along with that. You've mentioned in the article some examples of disruptors in the space. It sounded like you went to the States a couple of years ago and actually experienced some of these companies yourself. How did the chicken taste?
Yeah, no, it was, to tell you the truth, it was really well cooked, and it was pretty nice and indistinguishable. But the point of that was it's difficult to tell people that your entire industry for 100 years plus is going to get disrupted. It's much easier just to go show them. And so when you see examples like Plenty, like Memphis Meats, it was called at the time, it's got a different name now, and they're fundamentally, their whole mission is to produce cheap produce, protein, meat and veggies at the door of the consumer, and do that in a low emission, low energy model, and also cruelty free. You can see how that could fundamentally shift and change consumer preferences. The prices will be dropped. You think about the cost of supply, transit to get our products from New Zealand all the way into the markets in the States, Europe, UK, Asia. And if they can get to the market without those costs, without the attendant pollutant costs, without the emissions costs, it looks like an uphill battle for New Zealand. So we need to be doing something about it now.
So what are we looking at in terms of solutions for some of these issues you've just raised?
Yeah, I think I was hoping to point out in the article that these issues, of course, are not new, but within the Maori sector, there's incredible pressure by the shareholder, whether it's the individual iwi members or the shareholders of a land incorporation, or it's the iwi's parent, their runanga parent. They're making significant demands on our existing agricultural sector participants. And so that's been going on for a while. And so that pressure has made the Maori agricultural sector really focus hard. And I've given some examples. There's the Whaiao strategy by Awanui Hukapak, a big player in Bay of Plenty, Tauranga area, Māori-owned kiwi fruit farms, and they've gone wholeheartedly into an R&D innovation strategy, connecting up with research institutes overseas, investment capital, and they're looking to utilise the bioactives and nutraceuticals that are coming out of kiwi fruit and other produce. There's a similar model that's being produced down in Wakatu, led by Miriana Stevens, where they actually appointed at their board level and a director of innovation, and that's led to a significant amount of thinking, of investment and hard thinking around how do they shift their food product, their wine, their food, their seafood into other areas. And so, of course, they're looking at nutraceuticals. They've just signed 4 research agreements with Japanese research partners. And then there are other groups as well. Te Atiho, which is based in the Whanganui River, they're looking hard at the additional income streams, honey, manuka honey, and other activities. Of course, they're also positioning their products as single source. They're trying to define them, separate them away from just the mass products in the market.
Mm. And just briefly to mention the you're talking about seafood there, the Ocean 2035 conference later this year. What are you looking forward to there?
Yeah, so Oceana 2035 Summit is going to be a kind of a linchpin for really pulling a lot of this together. I mean, the key thing that will happen at that summit will be effectively the markets, Tesco and others, coming to tell us around how they're going to approach our products for the next 10 years, and how if we don't fundamentally change our approach, reduce our emissions, reduce our carbon footprint, we may not even be in the market. We're going to hear from Karen Ross, Secretary of Agriculture of California, how they're actually regulating their farmers around their emissions, particularly methane. And then the point of the summit fundamentally is to build a platform, a joint Australia-New Zealand Pacific Island platform. And it's really important that the communities, Indigenous communities, who climate change is affecting us, are critical part of that entire platform of conversation. So we're working really hard. There'll be a speaker, there'll be an Aboriginal, Clinton Wanganeen from Naronga Nation will be there talking about their proposition around participating in climate change initiatives. We're having, it's a significant amount of Maori component of parties who are involved in this dramatically here in New Zealand. The communities that get most affected by this need to have a strong voice. And hoping for Oceana 2535 Summit is really going to be a platform for launching that. It's a joint Australian-New Zealand government-supported initiative. Researchers, agri-tech founders, investment bodies, the regulators, government officials, all coming together, recognising this is an important sector and we need to get it right.
That sounds like an interesting initiative. Guy Royal, thank you very much. Kia ora, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Kia ora, Will. Thanks very much.